These are some input validations that you can do in your code. So range check is, for example, when you check that the number entered is between one number and another. For example, number must be between 13 and 19. So if the user enters 20 or anything lower than 13, then it would be invalid. Another type of check is type check, very important. So for example, if you're expecting the user to enter an integer, and if they enter a float or a string, then that would be wrong, and you can do a check in your code to make sure that the user has entered an integer. You can also combine some of these checks with each other as well, and we'll see an example of that as well. Length check, so let's say you have a customer number that must be 10 digits. You can do a length check, so you can make sure that they have entered an integer that is 10 digits. So you can check the length of your integer and make sure it's no more or less than 10, for example. Presence check is when you check that the user has entered something. So maybe you've asked the user for a username and they just press submit without entering anything. That would be wrong. So you can check to make sure that they have entered information. Another example is to ensure that the terms and conditions checkbox has been checked before the form is submitted. Another type of check is format check. So you could definitely apply this to dates where, for example, you want your date to be in a certain format, and this is an example. With drop-down lists, you give them the options and they can choose from that list. And this again is part of input validation because it ensures that the information that they have selected is valid. So it comes under validation. Here's an example of range check. So we want the age to be between 13 and 19. And what we do is we put it into a while true loop and we prompt the user to enter the age, and then we check to see if the number they have entered is in that range, and only then do we break the loop. So it will keep prompting them to enter age until it's definitely in that range. So I've run the code and I'm going to try an age that is less than 13. So let's say 1, and it's prompting me to enter age again. I'm going to try a larger number, so 90. It's still prompting me to enter age, and if I try for 14, for example, that's the end of it, and it prints the student age here. Now if I run again, if you're doing testing, you can do extreme testing. So we know that it has to be greater than or equal to 13. So if I put 13 just to test this, it's fine. And let's run again and put 19. It's fine again. And let's try 12 as well. And that should not be accepted, which it's not. And let's try 20 as well. That too should not be accepted. And let's try a valid number. Again, it's accepted. That's fine. Next, we have an example of type check. So in this example, we want the user to enter an integer, and we've seen this example before already. So we put it into a try except and we add the while true to make sure that they do enter the correct type, and then we break the loop. Here we have an example of type check validation, which you have already seen before. We're expecting the user to enter an integer, so if they put anything other than integer, it will keep prompting them to enter again. So let's try a decimal as well, and now I'll try an integer and it doesn't ask me anymore. Next, we have an example of presence check. So here we ask the user to enter name, and then we make sure that the string is not empty. So if it's not empty, then we break. So if it is empty, then it will prompt the user to enter the name again. So here's an example of presence check validation. If I don't enter anything in the name box and I just press OK, it will ask me again. So it will keep asking me until I enter something in there, and then the string is no longer going to be empty, and then it will break. So this is a presence check validation, an example of it. Here we have an example of length check validation. We ask the user to enter a number, and we want to make sure that that number is 10 digits long. So we are assuming that the user does enter an integer. We're not doing the type check here, we're just doing the length check here. Now we're using the len function, but the len function can only be used for strings or lists, for example, but not for integers. So in order to check this, what we need to do is we need to convert our integer to a string and then do the length check on that string. So that's what's happening here. Len of string version of n, which is an integer. So let's try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's not happy because it's not 10 digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's happy now because that was 10 digits. And if I try a much longer digit, more than 10, again, it's not happy. It has to be 10 digits exactly. And then it will break. So that's an example of length check.